This signage from the late 1980s captures the stark reality of South Africa's segregated state. By 1990, the country sat on the edge of a violent collapse, and as the world watched, many expected the release of the nation's most famous political prisoner to be the spark that ignited a civil war. For 27 years, Nelson Mandela lived inside a 4-inch concrete wall on Robben Island. This decades-long confinement and forced labor created a logical, almost inevitable foundation for a policy of vengeance. Yet, when those prison gates opened in February of that year, the world met an unexpected reality. Mandela stepped out with a deliberate, manufactured calm. This was a masterclass in self-regulation. Mandela understood that to manage the explosive anger of millions, he first had to maintain total control over his own emotional state. In a volatile ecosystem, stability depends on a leader's capacity to absorb the momentum of a conflict rather than adding to it. Mandela chose to disarm the situation through sheer emotional discipline. We can see this strategy in practice by moving into a private dining room. Two historical enemies are sitting across from one another at a small wooden table. Mandela sits on one side. On the other sits Christo Brandt, the man who served as his prison guard for years. This dinner was an exercise in social awareness. Mandela was using the setting to gather intelligence, carefully studying the psychology and motivations of those who had previously held him captive. Building a democratic bridge requires more than just goodwill. It requires an understanding of the structural integrity and the deep-seated fears embedded in the riverbank on the enemy's side. Mandela recognized that a stable future relied on transforming an oppressor into a required partner, depending entirely on a leader's capacity for empathy. This strategy scaled up to the cultural level in 1995. This is Ellis Park, where a massive crowd gathered for the Rugby World Cup in an atmosphere of intense skepticism and racial tension. The national team, the Springboks, wore a green and gold jersey that had served for decades as a primary symbol of apartheid and white supremacy. Mandela walked onto this pitch wearing that exact jersey, a move that sent a shockwave through both his supporters and his detractors. He was practicing strategic co-optation. Instead of destroying a symbol his enemies loved, he hijacked it, using it to force a fractured country toward a shared identity. Co-opting these symbols allowed the ecosystem to celebrate a single victory together, bypassing the resentment that usually follows a total cultural purge. This approach eventually became a matter of institutional policy. While many transitioning nations seek retributive justice through punishment, Mandela's administration launched a radical restorative experiment. This is Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who led the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This body provided a formal, legal framework for national healing. Victims and perpetrators were brought into public courtrooms to speak their truths openly, detailing the crimes of the past before the entire nation. This process was designed to extract the generational trauma that had poisoned the country's institutions, ensuring that the new democracy wasn't built on a foundation of hidden secrets. Systemic rot requires transparency. By forcing the country to look at its own wounds, Mandela ensured that the new government could operate without the weight of buried resentment. By the mid-1990s, South Africa had transitioned from the brink of civil war to a functioning multiracial democracy, a turnaround experts deemed impossible. This peaceful transition was secured without military force or economic intimidation. It was a victory achieved through the strategic application of emotional intelligence. This portrait of Mandela captures a leader who treated empathy as a calculated strategic tool, using it to navigate complex negotiations and dismantle long-standing barriers. His career suggests a new definition of power. Influence is tied less to the capacity to dominate others and more to a leader's ability to master their own internal state. Total self-regulation allows a leader to stabilize the entire ecosystem they lead. When you look at your own organization, ask yourself, how are you managing the emotions of your environment?